Of the desperate attacks launched during the fall of France in May 1940, there was just one mission that would capture the horror and heroism of that doomed campaign in a single terrible moment. On the morning of the 12th of May, 5 Fairey Battle light bombers approached 2 vital bridges over the Albert Canal near Maastricht. Their orders were simple: destroy those bridges at any cost. The cost would prove absolute. All 5 aircraft were shot down. 2 Victoria Crosses would be awarded posthumously. The bridges remained standing. For decades afterward, the Fairey Battle has been remembered solely for that carnage. 14 May alone saw 35 aircraft obliterated in a single afternoon. The losses were so catastrophic that by June 1940, the type had been withdrawn from combat operations entirely, branded obsolete, inadequate, and perhaps most damningly of all, a flying coffin. But here's what history often forgets. While France burned and Britain stood alone, that same reviled aircraft would go on to perform a task far more crucial than any bridge attack. Without the Fairey Battle, the Commonwealth Air Training Plan, the program that would ultimately produce over 130,000 aircrew for the Allied cause, might never have gotten off the ground. This is the story of the aircraft everyone loves to hate and the mission that actually mattered. That aircraft was the Fairey Battle. To understand how the Fairey Battle came to be, we need to go back to April 1933 when the British Air Ministry issued specification P.27/32. The requirement was ambitious, perhaps overly so. A single-engine, 2-seat day bomber capable of carrying 1,000 pounds of bombs over 1,000 miles at 200 miles per hour. By the standards of the early 1930s, this was asking for a great deal from a single engine that frankly didn't yet exist. The specification emerged from a peculiar confluence of strategic thinking and international politics. According to aviation historian Tony Butler, Britain's bomber strategy in the early 1920s had been primarily focused on France as a potential adversary. The range requirement, somewhat tellingly, was sufficient to reach Paris. By 1933, however, the calculus had changed. The 1932 Geneva Disarmament Conference was underway, and there was genuine concern that heavier bombers might be banned entirely. The Air Ministry wanted an insurance policy, a light bomber that could slip under potential treaty restrictions while still delivering meaningful striking power. 4 companies responded to specification P.27/32: Fairey, Hawker, Armstrong, Whitworth, and Bristol. The Air Ministry selected 2 to proceed with prototypes: Armstrong, Whitworth, and Fairey Aviation Company. Fairey's design was led by Belgian aeronautical engineer Marcel Lebel, who made several critical early decisions. The most consequential was the choice of power plant. Lebel selected the newly developed Rolls-Royce Merlin die engine, still in its infancy but showing tremendous promise. The Merlin offered exceptional power, combined with a compact frontal area, which would allow the aircraft to achieve exceptionally clean aerodynamic lines. Paired with a de Havilland 3-bladed variable pitch propeller, this combination would give the Battle a genuine performance advantage over the biplane bombers. It was meant to replace the Hawker Hart and Hind. The resulting design was, by 1933 standards, thoroughly modern. It featured all-metal stress-skin construction, a low-mounted cantilever monoplane wing, and a retractable tailwheel undercarriage. With its sleek fuselage and enclosed cockpit, the Battle resembled an oversized fighter more than a traditional bomber. It was designed to carry 4 250-pound bombs internally within the wings, with provision for 2 additional bombs on external racks. The crew of 3 was somewhat awkwardly arranged. The pilot sat under a long greenhouse-style canopy, with the radio operator and air gunner seated behind him. The bomb aimer and observer occupied a prone position in the belly of the fuselage, sighting through an open panel behind the radiator outlet. This arrangement had a critical flaw. If the pilot's canopy was open during the bomb run, hot air and oil mist from the radiator would blow directly into the bomb aimer's face, rendering the Merkur 7-core setting bomb sight nearly useless. On the 10th of March 1936, the first Fairey prototype, K4303, lifted off from Hayes, Middlesex, powered by a Merlin I producing 1,030 horsepower. The aircraft was promptly transferred to RAF Martlesham Heath for service trials. The results were impressive by the standards of the specification it had been designed to meet: a maximum speed of 257 miles per hour and a range approaching 1,000 miles with a full bomb load. By mid-1930 standards, this was genuinely advanced performance. The Battle was faster and had considerably greater range than the biplane bombers then in service. However, there was a problem that some members of the air staff had already identified even before the prototype flew. By 1936, the strategic landscape had shifted dramatically. Germany was rearming openly, the Luftwaffe was expanding at an alarming rate, and the modest range and bomb load specified back in 1933 now seemed woefully inadequate for a potential conflict with a resurgent Germany. But there was enormous political pressure to rapidly expand the RAF's frontline strength to match the German buildup. The Air Ministry needed numbers, and it needed them quickly. As a result, the decision was made to place the battle into immediate mass production, even before the prototype had completed its flight trials. In June 1935, an initial production order for 155 aircraft was issued under specification P.23/35. The name Battle was officially assigned. The first production battle, K7558, flew in June 1937. It underwent official handling and performance trials, successfully demonstrating the aircraft's ability to complete 1,000-mile missions under full bomb load. The first 136 Fairey-built battles were powered by the Merlin I engine, making them among the first operational aircraft to use this power plant, beating the Hawker Hurricane into service by several months. As the RAF embarked on its massive pre-war expansion program, the battle became a priority production target. Orders ballooned. At one point, 2,419 aircraft were on order. Production was split between Fairey's newly completed factory at Heaton Chapel, Stockport, and a shadow factory operated by the Austin Motor Company at Longbridge. In total, Fairey would produce 1,156 battles, while Austin built 1,029. An additional 16 were manufactured for Belgium, identifiable by their longer radiator cowling and smoother camouflage finish. Production aircraft were progressively fitted with improved Merlin engines, the Merlin 2, 3, and 5, though all bomber variants retained the designation Battle Menk 1. The type was manufactured until September 1940, by which time a total of 2,201 machines had been completed. By the standards of what it was meant to replace, the Battle was a tremendous leap forward. When it entered service in 1937, it could carry twice as many bombs over twice the distance as the Hawker Hart. But by 1937, the world had moved on. Fighter performance had increased exponentially. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, which would enter service the same year, was nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the Battle, and crucially, the Battle's defensive armament, a single 303-inch Browning machine gun in the starboard wing for the pilot, and one flexibly mounted Vickers K-gun in the rear cockpit, was utterly inadequate. The Battle lacked self-sealing fuel tanks, it lacked cockpit armor, at least initially. It was robust and easy to fly, yes, but it was fundamentally a 1933 design entering service in a 1937 world. And by 1939, it would be asked to fight in a 1940 war. On the 20th of May, 1937, No. 63 Squadron, based at RAF Upwood in Cambridgeshire, took delivery of its first Fairey Battle, becoming the first squadron to operate the type. By May 1939, 17 RAF squadrons had been equipped with battles. While many of these were frontline bomber squadrons, some operated under No. 2 Group in a non-mobilizing training role. On the eve of war, these training squadrons were reassigned to No. 6 Training Group or held in reserve. When war was declared on the 3rd of September 1939, the Battle was already obsolete. Everyone in the RAF knew it, but there was no suitable replacement. And so, on the 2nd of September 1939, one day before the formal declaration of war, 10 battle squadrons were deployed to pre-selected airfields in France as part of the Advanced Air Striking Force, independent of the British Expeditionary Force. The plan was straightforward. If Germany launched strategic bombing attacks against the West, the battles would retaliate with strikes against the Ruhr industrial heartland, benefiting from their forward deployment and closer range to German targets. But the Germans had no intention of provoking the Western Allies while their forces were engaged in Poland. And so began the Phony War, a period of uneasy inactivity that lasted from September 1939 until May 1940. During this time, the battles flew reconnaissance missions over the Siegfried Line, occasionally encountering German fighters. On 20 September 1939, Sergeant F. Letford, a battle gunner, shot down a Messerschmitt Bf 109 during a patrol near Aachen. This engagement is recognized as the RAF's first aerial victory of the Second World War, a distinction that belongs to the much-maligned Fairey Battle. But that same day, 3 battles were engaged by German fighters. 2 were lost. The pattern was clear. The battle was hopelessly outmatched. At 14,000 feet, the Bf 109 was nearly 100 miles per hour faster. In a straight fight, there was no contest. During the winter of 1939-40, the Advanced Air Striking Force was restructured. Some battle squadrons were rotated back to the UK and replaced by Bristol Blenheim units. Training exercises continued. The squadrons waited. On the 10th of May 1940, the waiting ended. Germany launched Fall-Gelb Case Yellow, the invasion of France and the Low Countries. The battles were immediately called upon to conduct low-level tactical attacks against the advancing German columns. The results were catastrophic. On the first day, 3 out of 8 battles were lost in the morning sortie. That afternoon, 24 battles were dispatched. 10 were shot down. The surviving aircraft returned riddled with damage. Despite bombing from altitudes as low as 250 feet, the attacks had little discernible impact on the German advance. The following day, the 11th of May, the Belgian Air Force launched attacks with its own battles against bridges over the Albert Canal. Of 9 aircraft sent, 6 were lost. That same day, an RAF sortie against a German column saw 7 out of 8 battles destroyed. And then came the 12th of May 1940. 5 battles of no 12 squadron were tasked with destroying 2 critical road bridges over the Albert Canal near Maastricht. The mission was led by Flying Officer Donald Garland, with Observer Sergeant Thomas Gray and Air Gunner Leading Aircraftsman Lawrence Reynolds aboard Battle P-2204, coded PHK. They knew the mission was near suicidal. The bridges were heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns and patrolled by Bf-109 fighters. They attacked anyway. All 5 aircraft were shot down. 4 were destroyed outright during the attack. Garland's battle managed to destroy 1 span of the bridge before being hit. The aircraft crashed. There were no survivors. Flying Officer Garland and Sergeant Gray were posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, the RAF's first Victoria Crosses of the Second World War. Tragically, Leading Aircraftsman Reynolds, the rear gunner, did not share in the award. The bridge was temporarily out of action, but German engineers erected a pontoon bridge within hours. The losses mounted relentlessly. On the 14th of May 1940, in a desperate attempt to halt the German breakthrough at Sedan, the Advanced Air Striking Force launched an all-out attack. Every available bomber was committed, 63 battles and 8 Bristol Blenheims. 8 they were sent against the German bridgehead and pontoon bridges over the Meuse River. The strike force was intercepted by swarms of Bf-109S and Me-110S, while the sky erupted with flak. 40 aircraft were lost. 35 of them were battles. It is difficult to convey the scale of this catastrophe. Over 50% losses were routine during this period. Some missions saw loss rates approaching 100%. After these abortive daylight raids, the surviving battles were switched to night operations where losses were significantly lower, but the damage to the type's reputation was already irreparable. On the 15th of June 1940, the last remaining aircraft of the Advanced Air Striking Force returned to Britain. In just 6 weeks of combat, nearly 200 battles had been lost. Between 10 and the 16th of May alone, 99 aircraft were destroyed, almost half the total losses in a span of just 7 days. For a brief period after their return, the RAF continued to deploy battles operationally. No one group was reformed, and 4 new Polish squadrons, NOS 300, 301, 304, and 305, were equipped with the type. They were used against German invasion barges massed in the Channel ports for Operation Sea Lion. The last combat sortie by battles was mounted on the night of 15-16 October 1940 by NUB 301 Polish Squadron against Boulogne and by NASA's 12 and 142 squadrons against Calais. Shortly afterward, these squadrons were re-equipped with Vickers Wellington medium bombers. But while the battle's frontline combat career in Europe had ended in disaster, the aircraft story was far from over. The South African Air Force operated battles in the East African campaign against Italian forces in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Italian Somaliland. Unlike the modern, heavily armed Bf-109S the RAF had faced in France, the Italians fielded smaller numbers of older biplane fighters, primarily the Fiat Kra .32 and CR.42. In this environment, where the opposition was less overwhelming, the battle crews were able to contribute more effectively, conducting bombing and reconnaissance missions. Several battles were still lost, particularly when caught over predictable targets like airfields and ports, but the experience was markedly different from the meat grinder of France. A small number of battles also saw service with the Hellenic Air Force during the Italian and German invasion of Greece from late 1940 to April 1941. Approximately a dozen aircraft with serial numbers starting from B-274 participated in secondary bombing roles against enemy infantry. Most were destroyed on the ground during Luftwaffe raids on the airfields at Tanagra and Tatoi, north of Athens, in March and April 1941. Their contribution was minimal, but far from the battlefields of Europe and Africa. The Fairey Battle was about to embark on its most important mission, one that would dwarf any bridge attack or tactical strike in strategic significance. In August 1939, the Royal Canadian Air Force received its first batch of 8 battles at RCF Station Borden, Ontario. This was the beginning of something extraordinary. Over the course of the war, a total of 802 battles would be delivered to Canada, serving as dual-control trainers, target tugs, and gunnery trainers for the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. The BCATP, established in December 1939, was one of the most ambitious and successful training programs in military history. Its mandate was to train aircrew pilots, navigators, bomb aimers, wireless operators, and air gunners for the entire Allied war effort, and it needed aircraft, lots of aircraft, quickly. The battle was perfect for this role. It was available in large numbers. It was robust and forgiving, easy for relatively inexperienced pilots to fly. It had sufficient performance to teach the fundamentals of multi-engine handling, navigation, and bombing procedures, and crucially, it could be converted relatively easily into training variants: the Battle T dual control trainer, the Battle IT gunnery trainer with a Bristol Type 1 turret, and the Battle TT target tug. Canada received 739 battles. Australia took delivery of 366, which served with the Royal Australian Air Force under the designation A-22. South Africa received approximately 340. Smaller numbers went to New Zealand, India, and Ireland. In total, over half of all battles produced. More than 1,100 aircraft were deployed to Commonwealth training schools. By the time the war ended, the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan had graduated over 130,000 aircrew, more than half of all Commonwealth aircrew who served during the war. These men flew Lancasters over Germany, Spitfires over Britain, Hurricanes in North Africa, and Mosquitoes on precision raids. They formed the backbone of Bomber Command, Fighter Command, and Coastal Command, and a significant proportion of them learned to fly, navigate, and bomb in a Fairey Battle. Consider what might have happened without the battle. The BCATP required immediate large-scale deliveries of suitable training aircraft. Purpose-built trainers, like the Avro Anson and Bristol Bolingbroke, were not available in sufficient numbers during the critical early years of the program. Without the battle filling that gap, the entire training schedule would have been delayed by months, possibly years. Squadrons, desperate for replacement crews, would have been left undermanned. Operations would have been curtailed. The battle didn't win the war in a single heroic moment. It won the war slowly, methodically, one student at a time, in the unsexy, unglamorous work of turning civilians into combat aircrew. The Fairey Battle remained in RAF service in secondary roles until 1949. The RCF retired its last battles shortly after the end of hostilities in 1945. The RAF withdrew its final examples in 1949. The last operational battles, those serving as engine testbeds, flew into the late 1940s. Production totaled 2,201 aircraft, including the 16 for Belgium. Of these, more than 1,100 served in training roles overseas. Approximately 200 were lost in combat operations during the Battle of France and subsequent operations in 1940. Hundreds more were expended as training aircraft, target tugs, and engine testbeds. Today, only a handful survive. The most prominent is L5343, displayed at the Royal Air Force Museum, Hendon in London. This aircraft served with No. 98 Squadron based at Caldadarnes, Iceland, for anti-invasion operations in July 1940. It was the first RAF aircraft to land on Icelandic soil and crash during subsequent operations. In 1972, the RAF recovered the wreck for restoration, which was completed at the Michael Beetham Conservation Centre using parts from another battle, L5340. The aircraft now stands as a memorial to the men who flew it. RX-7384, a battle IT trainer, is displayed at the Canada Aviation and Space Museum in Ottawa. Built as a pilot trainer in 1940, it was taken on strength by the RCF in 1941, converted to a gunnery trainer in 1942, and used until 1943. It was restored in the 1990s. R3950, a battle TT target, resides at the Royal Museum of the Armed Forces and Military History in Brussels, Belgium. This aircraft spent much of its career in Canada before being acquired by the Brussels Museum in 1990 as representative of Belgian Air Force aircraft from 1940. NEN 2188 is under restoration at the South Australian Aviation Museum in Port Adelaide. It was recovered from a tidal swamp near Port Pirie. The Fairey Battle's reputation has been defined almost exclusively by its disastrous performance in the Battle of France. The statistics are undeniably grim. Over 50% loss rates, near total destruction of entire squadrons, 2 Victoria Crosses awarded for missions that failed to achieve their objectives. It's easy to understand why the aircraft earned the nickname Flying Coffin. It's easy to see why it has become a byword for obsolescence and failure. But this reputation, while understandable, is also incomplete. The battle was designed in 1933 to a specification that was outdated by 1936, entered service in 1937 when it was already obsolescent, and was thrown into combat in 1940 against an enemy for which it was hopelessly outmatched. It was asked to perform unescorted, low-level daylight attacks against heavily defended targets within easy range of both anti-aircraft guns and modern fighters. No single-engine light bomber, regardless of design, could have survived such missions. The German Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, a far more famous and celebrated aircraft, suffered equivalent loss rates when used in similar roles during the Battle of Britain. Low-level attack missions ultimately passed into the hands of single-engine fighter bombers like the Hawker Typhoon, and later specialized twin-engine designs like the de Havilland Mosquito. The Battle was not a bad aircraft. It was a decent aircraft asked to do an impossible job. And when given a job, it could actually perform training the next generation of Allied aircrew. It excelled. The harsh truth is this. The 5 battles lost at Maastricht on the 12th of May 1940 are remembered because their destruction was dramatic, tragic, and immediate. The 802 battles sent to Canada are forgotten because their contribution was gradual, unglamorous, and invisible. But which mission actually mattered more to the outcome of the war? Would Britain have been better served by having those 802 aircraft available for futile attacks on French bridges where they would have been destroyed within weeks, or by using them to train tens of thousands of aircrew who would go on to fly thousands of successful missions over the following 5 years? The question answers itself. In the end, the Fairey Battle did not save Britain by destroying bridges or halting panzer columns. It saved Britain by ensuring that when the Lancaster and Halifax squadrons were ready, there were trained crews to fly them. When Fighter Command rebuilt after the Battle of Britain, there were trained pilots to fill the cockpits. When Bomber Command launched the 1,000 bomber raids, there were trained navigators, bomb aimers, and gunners to make them possible. That is the real legacy of the Fairey Battle. Not heroic, but indispensable. Not dramatic, but decisive. Not the aircraft that won battles, but the aircraft that built the force that won the war. Everyone hates the Flying Coffin, but without it, there might not have been anyone left to fly.